They mocked the homeless man. But he was a secret millionaire. His true identity left them shocked. The opulent ballroom of the Thorne Legacy Building, a testament to a lifetime of ruthless ambition and unparalleled success, was abuzz with a nervous energy that vibrated beneath the colossal crystal chandeliers. Their facets, each painstakingly polished, captured and refracted the light, casting a shimmering, almost ethereal glow upon the polished marble floors and the expectant faces gathered below. This was a space meticulously designed to exude power, to impress upon every visitor the sheer magnitude of Lysander Thorne's dominion, a fact that now seemed cruelly ironic to the man himself. Silas Blackwood, Lysander Thorne's nephew, stood at the podium, his posture radiating a smug satisfaction that bordered on offensive. A smirk of barely contained triumph played on his lips, a physical manifestation of the boundless avarice that had consumed him for years. His tailored suit, a masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship, seemed to shimmer with the reflected wealth of the room, every stitch proclaiming his new, undisputed dominion. He surveyed the assembled executives and distant relatives, a proprietary gleam in his eyes, as if already mentally itemizing their worth and considering how they might serve his burgeoning empire. Beside him, Vivian Sterling, the picture of corporate elegance, stood with an air of frigid satisfaction. Her emerald silk dress, custom-made and exquisitely cut, flowed around her like a second skin, accentuating her sharp, almost predatory grace. She held herself with an unyielding poise, her gaze sweeping the room with a detached superiority that had become her signature. The air hung thick with anticipation, heavy with the unspoken greed and barely suppressed envy of those present. The official reading of Lysander Thorne's last will and testament, a mere formality in their eyes, was finally at hand 6 months after his supposed passing. And so, Silas declared, his voice resonating with an almost theatrical gravitas, each word carefully enunciated for maximum impact. As per the legal pronouncements and the unshakable evidence of my dear uncle's unfortunate demise, the entirety of the Thorne Empire, his vast fortune, and all associated assets, are hereby transferred to my rightful control as his sole surviving heir. A ripple of murmurs, mostly of feigned condolence or thinly veiled congratulations, swept through the room. A few executives, those who had shrewdly aligned themselves with Silas in recent months, offered quick, obsequious nods. Distant relatives, who had perhaps hoped for a meager crumb from the table, managed weak, unconvincing smiles. Vivian offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. Just as Silas, his chest puffed out with an inflated sense of self-importance, was about to raise a celebratory glass of champagne, a low, guttural cough, followed by a wheezing chuckle, cut through the reverent silence. It was a sound utterly out of place, a jarring discord in the symphony of opulence. All eyes, previously fixed on the triumphant Silas, snapped towards the grand entrance. There, a figure previously unnoticed now stood. He was an old man, his clothes tattered and soiled, hanging loosely on his gaunt frame. His hair was a disheveled mess, matted with grime, and his face was almost entirely obscured by a thick, matted beard, streaked with gray and dirt. His eyes, however, glinted with an unnerving, knowing amusement, like embers smoldering in the depths of a dark cave. He leaned heavily on a gnarled cane, its rough wood contrasting sharply with the polished surfaces around him, a stark, unwelcome silhouette against the backdrop of gilded luxury. The air, already thick with anticipation, now grew heavy with an uncomfortable silence, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Silas, his triumphant expression curdling into one of profound annoyance, squinted, trying to make sense of the intrusion. Who is that? Security. How did this vagrant get in here? His voice was sharp, laced with the customary disdain he reserved for anyone beneath his notice, particularly the unwashed masses. A flicker of alarm, quickly suppressed, crossed his features. Such an unsightly disruption could not be tolerated on his day. The old man shuffled a few steps forward, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering on Silas and Vivian. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips, revealing stained, uneven teeth, a smile that held more knowledge than amusement. "Ah, Silas, always so quick to dismiss what you don't understand," he croaked, his voice raspy, yet carrying an undeniable resonance that cut through the buzzing whispers. It was a voice that burrowed into the minds of those present, unsettling them. And Vivian, my dear, still perfecting that exquisite mask of detached superiority. I see. Vivian recoiled slightly, a flicker of something akin to recognition, a fleeting shadow of a memory, quickly replaced by pure, unadulterated disdain. Her eyes narrowed. This is an outrage, she hissed, her voice a sharp whisper, her composure, for once, momentarily rattled. Remove him immediately. Silas scoffed, recovering his composure, his arrogance reasserting itself. He gestured dismissively at the old man. Look at him, he sneered, a cruel chuckle escaping his lips. The stench of the streets clings to him like cheap cologne. You think you can waltz into a gathering of titans, old man, and interrupt such an auspicious occasion? He chuckled again, a mocking, derisive sound. Perhaps you've come to beg for scraps, just as you did outside the building all these months? Well, get out. This is a private affair. The words were designed to humiliate, to diminish, to crush any semblance of dignity the old man might possess. The old man's eyes narrowed, the amusement in them sharpening into a piercing intensity that seemed to bore into Silas's very soul. Scraps, you say? An auspicious occasion, you claim? He took another deliberate step forward, his voice gaining strength, shedding its raspiness with each word, transforming from a wheeze into a resonant rumble that filled the vast room. You speak of a legacy, Silas, one you believe is now yours. You gloat about an empire, Vivian, one you thought was finally within your grasp. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, to sink into the stunned silence. Then a single, devastating sentence, delivered with the quiet, terrifying force of an earthquake. But what if I told you the game isn't over? What if I told you the true owner has merely been observing? A collective gasp swept through the room, a wave of stunned realization. Silas's face, moments ago flushed with triumph, turned ashen as if all blood had drained from his veins. Vivian's icy composure cracked, her carefully constructed facade shattering, revealing a flicker of raw, disbelieving fear in her eyes. The old man straightened, his shoulders squaring, his posture suddenly radiating an authority that transcended his tattered attire, an innate power that seemed to vibrate through the very air. He reached a trembling hand to his face, his fingers finding the edge of his matted beard, and with a slow, deliberate motion he began to peel it away. The room held its breath, suspended in a moment of terrifying, impossible realization, the very fabric of their reality beginning to unravel. To understand the profound shock rippling through that ballroom, one had to journey back 6 months, to a time when Lysander Thorne, the man now standing before them in the guise of a derelict, was still considered alive, albeit a recluse. Lysander Thorne, a name whispered with reverence and a touch of fear in the echelons of global real estate, had built his colossal empire from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick, deal by relentless deal. He had arrived in the city decades ago with nothing but a tattered suit, a stolen loaf of bread in his pocket, an unyielding will, and a mind sharper than any financial instrument. He had known the biting sting of hunger, the chill of nights spent on cold park benches, the indignity of charity lines. Those early hardships had forged in him an iron resolve, an unshakable determination to never be powerless again. He had started with a single rundown tenement, bought with borrowed money and relentless negotiation, transforming it into a thriving commercial hub, a testament to his innate ability to see potential where others saw only decay. From there, he had amassed properties, developed entire districts, and reshaped city skylines, his name becoming synonymous with ambition, shrewdness, and unimaginable wealth. He was not merely a businessman. He was an architect of fortunes, a titan whose touch turned dust into gold. But success, as Lysander had learned with bitter clarity over the decades, was a double-edged sword, a gilded cage. The higher he climbed, the lonelier the air became. The genuine connections, the shared struggles, the camaraderie of his youth, had gradually devolved into transactional exchanges. Each interaction weighed against its financial benefit. Friends became sycophants, partners became opportunists, and family. His family, a word he once held dear, had become the most profound source of his disillusionment. The warmth of human connection had been replaced by the cold calculations of net worth. He had no children of his own, having dedicated his life entirely to his empire, to the relentless pursuit of growth and power. His closest living relative, Silas Blackwood, his deceased sister's only son, had been groomed, albeit reluctantly, to someday take the reins. For years, Lysander had poured resources into Silas's education, his experiences, his supposed preparation. He had tried to instill in him the values of hard work, integrity, and foresight. But Lysander had watched Silas with a quiet, growing despair. The young man possessed an undeniable intelligence, inherited perhaps from his sharp-witted mother, but it was coupled with a rapacious greed and an arrogance that bordered on pathological. Silas saw people not as individuals with dreams and fears, but as pawns to be manipulated, resources to be exploited, or obstacles to be ruthlessly eliminated. He spoke of legacy only in terms of market capitalization and quarterly profits, never about the impact on communities or the lives his buildings touched. Lysander had witnessed Silas dismiss loyal, long-serving employees with a flick of his wrist, seen him gloat over the financial ruin of competitors, and heard him speak of Lysander's own eventual demise with an unsettling eagerness, disguised poorly as concern. On one occasion, Silas had even proposed tearing down a beloved historical landmark, a building Lysander had painstakingly restored, simply to erect a taller, more profitable skyscraper. The blatant disregard for anything beyond personal gain had chilled Lysander to the bone. Then there was Vivian Sterling, a woman of formidable intellect and icy charm, a high-ranking executive who managed Lysander's most prestigious luxury properties. She was a master of corporate politics, a chameleon of superficial politeness, capable of charming any room with her elegant wit. But beneath the polished veneer, Lysander had seen a soul as cold and calculating as a winter storm, a heart devoid of genuine warmth. She was meticulous in her work, yes, every detail of her projects flawlessly executed, but her meticulousness extended to her social climbing, her disdain for anyone perceived as lesser, and her absolute obsession with appearances. She valued property over people, profit over principle. Lysander had observed her treating service staff with barely concealed contempt, her voice a sharp edge hidden by a pleasant tone. Her interactions with him were always laced with a thinly veiled desire for more power, more influence, more control. She, too, saw his age, his occasional frailties, not as signs of humanity, but as opportunities for her own advancement, a path to usurp more authority within the empire. He had once overheard her mock a struggling artist who rented a small studio in one of his properties, dismissing her as deadweight despite her consistent payments and unique contributions to the building's character. In his opulent penthouse, surrounded by priceless art, custom-made furniture, and breathtaking city views that stretched to the horizon, Lysander often felt an overwhelming emptiness. The silence of the vast rooms pressed in on him. Birthdays brought elaborate gifts that felt like bribes, each one a transactional gesture, not a heartfelt sentiment. Illnesses prompted visits that felt like inspections of a prized asset, an assessment of his continued utility. Every interaction, every word, seemed to be weighed against the colossal shadow of his wealth. He began to suspect, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that if he were stripped of his fortune, if he were reduced to nothing, he would be nothing to them. He would cease to exist in their eyes, dissolving into irrelevance. The idea, audacious and born of profound despair, had begun to germinate months before his death. He had seen countless stories, fictional and real, of the rich feigning poverty to find true love or uncover loyalty. But Lysander's motivation was far darker, far more cynical. He didn't seek love, he sought truth. He sought to confirm his gravest fears, to strip away the masks worn by those closest to him, to see their true faces when they believed the powerful hand that fed them was gone. He wanted to push them to the limits of their perceived freedom, to witness the depth of their depravity. The plan was meticulously crafted, executed with the same precision he applied to his most complex real estate deals, each step calculated, each contingency planned. He had secretly contacted a discreet, highly ethical doctor from a foreign country, arranging for a death certificate based on a fabricated, incurable illness, a rare form of aggressive lymphoma that allowed for a plausible rapid decline. He had then employed a team of equally discreet specialists to arrange for a suitable anonymous body to be identified as his own, a body with a similar build and age, meticulously altered to match his dental records and a few distinguishing marks, including a small scar above his left eyebrow. The process was painstaking, complex, and horrifically expensive, costing millions, but Lysander viewed it as the ultimate investment in his own peace of mind, or perhaps the ultimate confirmation of his utter despair. He had legally transferred temporary control of his assets to a trusted, elderly lawyer, a man of unimpeachable integrity named Mr. Henderson, with strict instructions to only act upon specific, coded commands from Lysander himself. Mr. Henderson was the only living soul who knew the truth, a silent confidant whose loyalty was beyond question. Then came the physical transformation, a process both liberating and terrifying. He cut his own hair haphazardly, letting it grow wild and gray, losing the polished, distinguished look that had defined him. He ceased shaving, allowing a thick, matted beard to obscure his once distinguished jawline, adding years and a layer of anonymity. He acquired a set of old, ill-fitting clothes, stained and worn, from a charity bin, a frayed wool coat, torn trousers, and shoes with worn-through soles. He learned to stoop, to shuffle, to cultivate the weary, defeated gait of a man who had nothing left to lose, whose spirit had been broken by the relentless grind of the streets. He even practiced his new, raspy voice, a sound that would be utterly unrecognizable to those who knew him as the booming magnate. His once sharp eyes, however, retained their keenness, hidden beneath a curtain of feigned confusion and weariness, observing everything. He had studied the mannerisms of the homeless, the way they moved, spoke, and interacted with a world that largely ignored them. He was not merely acting. He was immersing himself in a brutal reality. His chosen location was no accident. He positioned himself just outside the grand entrance of the Thorne Legacy building, one of his most iconic and profitable properties. It was a cruel irony, a stage set for the ultimate performance, where his supposed heirs would parade in and out, believing themselves masters of his domain, while the true master sat unnoticed, observing. He wanted to feel the cold, the hunger, the indignity, the raw, visceral experience of being invisible. He wanted to see how they would react to the very embodiment of the poverty they so abhorred, a poverty that, by his own design, had become his temporary reality. He wanted to see if even a shred of humanity, a flicker of compassion, remained in the hearts of those who stood to inherit everything he had built. It was a gamble, a desperate search for a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness of his disillusionment. The transition from penthouse to pavement was brutal, a shock to every fiber of Lysander's 72-year-old body. The biting winds of autumn seemed to mock his once impenetrable heated offices, whistling through the gaps in his threadbare clothing. The relentless rumble of city traffic replaced the hushed quiet of his soundproofed rooms, a constant, jarring cacophony. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, a sensation he had not truly known since his youth. A sharp, insistent pain that reminded him of his vulnerability. His muscles ached from sleeping on cold concrete. His joints protested with every movement, each step a reminder of his new, harsh reality. The incessant dampness of the city streets seeped into his bones, and the lack of proper hygiene became a constant, pervasive discomfort. Yet, through it all, his resolve remained unbroken. This was his chosen crucible, his self-imposed exile, designed to expose the raw, unvarnished truth of human nature, particularly that of his closest associates. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through no matter the personal cost. His first encounters with Silas Blackwood were precisely as Lysander had predicted, and yet no less painful for their predictability. Silas, now strutting with an amplified swagger, his head held high, would often exit the Thorne Legacy building, flanked by a phalanx of eager executives, their faces alight with anticipation of his next command. His eyes would scan the street, not for the beauty of the city, but for perceived threats to his newfound dominion, for anything that might mar his carefully crafted image. He would invariably spot Lysander, slumped against the building's cold marble facade, a crumpled figure of destitution, and his expression would harden, a mask of unadulterated disgust. "Get that derelict out of here!" Silas would bark at the building's security guards, his voice carrying the full authority of his usurped position echoing with disdain. "He's an eyesore. This is a prestigious property, not a homeless shelter. He's scaring away potential clients." The guards, well acquainted with Silas's temperament, would approach Lysander with a weary, apologetic air, urging him to move along. One particularly cold morning, as Lysander shivered uncontrollably beneath a thin, inadequate blanket, his body trembling, Silas had stopped directly in front of him, his polished shoes glinting in the pale sunlight. He had looked down at Lysander, his lip curled in disgust as if he were observing a particularly repulsive insect. "You know," Silas had mused, not to Lysander, but to the young executive beside him, his voice dripping with condescension, "it's people like him who are a drain on society. My uncle, Lysander, he built this empire from nothing, through sheer will. He wouldn't have tolerated such slovenliness. He'd have wanted this place pristine, a monument to his power." And soon, he had added, a possessive glint in his eye, his voice lowering conspiratorially, "it will be mine, untainted by such blight." Lysander had met his nephew's gaze, his own eyes veiled with a feigned vacuity, but inside, a cold, hard knot of disappointment tightened in his chest. Silas saw only a nuisance, a stain on his grand vision, utterly oblivious to the true owner of the very ground he stood upon. The casual cruelty of the words uttered so thoughtlessly had cut deeper than any physical discomfort. Vivian Sterling, in her own way, was even more chilling. Her disdain was less overt, more subtle, a refined form of corporate elitism that Lysander found almost more offensive. She never raised her voice or issued direct commands to security in Lysander's presence, maintaining her facade of detached professionalism, but her actions spoke volumes. She would sweep out of the building, her designer clothes rustling with every confident stride, her high heels clicking precisely on the pavement, each click a statement of her status. If Lysander was in her path, she would invariably take a wide, exaggerated detour, her nostrils flaring ever so slightly, as if detecting an unpleasant odor, a silent dismissal of his very existence. She often carried a small, impeccably clean purse, and on several occasions, Lysander had watched her drop a single, crumpled dollar bill onto the sidewalk, not near him, but far enough away that it clearly wasn't an offer of charity, but a dismissive gesture of "Here, go away and don't bother me." It was an act of profound dehumanization, turning a person into a mere obstacle to be removed with a trivial offering. Once, Lysander had overheard her speaking animatedly on her phone, standing just a few feet from where he sat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a grimy cap, pretending to be asleep. "The new renovations on the penthouse level are going to be exquisite, darling," she had purred into the phone, her voice a silky whisper. Silas is truly embracing Lysander's vision, but with a modern, more exclusive touch. We simply must ensure that the surrounding areas reflect that same level of prestige. The aesthetics, you understand, are paramount. We can't have undesirable elements detracting from the property's value. Her voice, though not directed at him, was a sharp, cutting blade designed to convey her utter contempt for his very existence, for the undesirable elements she believed he represented. Lysander felt the truth of his fears solidify. They saw him as an object, a problem to be eradicated, a mere obstacle to their ambition. They celebrated his death as a liberation, a green light to plunder his legacy, to mold it into something even more self-serving and exclusive. The bitter cold of the street was nothing compared to the coldness of their hearts. Amidst this relentless barrage of indifference and cruelty, a stark contrast began to emerge, a single, flickering flame of human kindness in the vast, cold expanse of his experiment. Her name was Alara. She was a cleaner in the Thorn Legacy building, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 20s or early 30s, her face often etched with a weariness that spoke of long hours and demanding labor, but also with a quiet dignity. Lysander had observed her for weeks before their first interaction. She would arrive early in the morning, often before the sun had fully risen, her small figure silhouetted against the nascent light, and leave late at night, her shoulders slumped, but her movements still purposeful, never hurried. He noticed her quiet efficiency, the thoroughness with which she cleaned, her respectful greetings to the security guards, her occasional, fleeting smiles at the few other early morning workers. She treated the janitorial staff, often overlooked, with a quiet camaraderie. She was a small, almost invisible cog in the vast machinery of the building, yet her presence seemed to radiate a gentle warmth. One particularly frigid afternoon, a biting wind whipped through the city streets, threatening to tear the flimsy cardboard shelter Lysander had fashioned around himself. His body shuddered uncontrollably, his old bones protesting the deep cold that had settled within them. Alara, on her lunch break, emerged from the building, clutching a brown paper bag, her shoulders hunched against the wind. She paused, her gaze falling upon Lysander, huddled against the wall. There was no revulsion in her eyes, no pity that felt condescending, just a quiet, empathetic concern, a recognition of shared humanity. She walked towards him slowly, cautiously, as if not to startle him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft, gentle, almost hesitant, yet clear enough to cut through the city's din. "Are you very cold?" Her eyes, though tired, held a genuine warmth. Lysander, startled by the unexpected human kindness, merely nodded, trying to maintain his disguise of a lost, confused old man, his voice unable to form words. I have an extra sandwich," she continued, holding out the paper bag, her hand trembling slightly from the cold. "And some hot coffee. It's not much, but it might help warm you up." Lysander looked at the humble offering, then at her face. Her eyes were genuine, without a trace of the condescension he had grown accustomed to, no expectation of gratitude, just pure, unadulterated compassion. He slowly reached out and took the bag. His hand, shaking slightly, brushed hers, and he felt the warmth of her skin, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her very being, a stark contrast to the biting cold he had endured. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse and emotion, a sound almost alien to his own ears. "You're welcome," she replied, offering a small, sad smile, a gesture of quiet understanding. "Please stay warm." She then walked away, returning to the warmth of the building, leaving Lysander with a simple sandwich and a cup of coffee that felt like the most luxurious meal he had ever tasted, a beacon of human warmth in his self-imposed darkness. The simple act had touched a chord deep within him that he thought had long atrophied. This was not a one-time occurrence. Over the ensuing weeks, Alara became a regular, quiet presence in his desolate existence. Despite her own obvious struggles, Lysander often noticed her tired eyes, the faint lines of worry around her mouth, the way she clutched her worn coat on cold days, her shoes often scuffed and thin. She never failed to offer him something. Sometimes it was another sandwich, sometimes a piece of fruit she had saved from her own meager lunch. She would often leave a small, sealed cup of hot tea or coffee near his usual spot, knowing he might be too proud to accept it directly. On one particularly rainy day, when the sky wept endlessly and the streets turned to icy rivers, she had appeared with a small, worn but clean blanket. "It's an old one," she had explained, her voice barely a whisper, "but it's better than nothing. Please take it." Lysander had accepted it, feeling a profound gratitude he hadn't known was still possible for him, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the physical blanket itself. He observed her interactions with others, a silent witness to her quiet virtues. He heard her patiently explain directions to lost tourists, saw her offer a kind word to a struggling vendor whose stall had blown over in the wind, witnessed her pick up litter others ignored, even when it wasn't her direct responsibility. She seemed to embody a purity of spirit that Lysander had long believed extinct in the cutthroat world he inhabited. He learned, through snippets of overheard conversations, that Alara lived alone with her ailing mother, that her cleaning job was their sole source of income, that she often worked extra shifts, sometimes pulling doubles, to cover medical bills and their meager rent. Her struggles were real, palpable, yet they did not harden her heart. Instead, they seemed to deepen her capacity for empathy, to make her more attuned to the suffering of others. She was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One afternoon, Silas and Vivian emerged from the building together, their voices carrying on the biting wind, oblivious to the world outside their gilded cage. They were discussing a new, extravagant corporate event, a grand gala to celebrate their new reign. "We must spare no expense," Vivian was saying, her voice crisp and clear, her tone authoritative. "It's about projecting an image of unassailable wealth and power, a tribute to Lysander's foresight, of course, but more importantly, a statement of our own dominance." "Indeed," Silas chuckled, a self-satisfied sound, "and a celebration of our new era. No more old-fashioned sensibilities." We'll show the world how a true empire is run. As they walked past Lysander, Silas paused, nudged him roughly with his polished shoe, a deliberate act of casual cruelty. Still here, old man? Haven't you found a bridge to sleep under yet? Don't you know this property is now owned by people who value aesthetics? He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Lysander coughed, hunching further into his blanket, his gaze briefly meeting Alara's, who was sweeping the pavement nearby, her broom momentarily still. Her eyes, filled with a silent sorrow and a flash of indignation, met his, and for a fleeting moment a profound connection passed between them, a shared understanding of the cruelty they had just witnessed, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice. The contrast was stark, undeniable. On one side, the ruthless greed, the callous disregard, the open mockery from those who stood to inherit his vast fortune. They reveled in his supposed absence, their every word and action confirming his deepest fears, ripping away any lingering hope he had for their redemption. On the other, the quiet, unwavering compassion of a stranger, a humble cleaner who, despite her own burdens, offered dignity and warmth without expectation, without judgment. Lysander, the master manipulator, the man who had orchestrated this elaborate charade, found himself profoundly moved, his cynicism slowly eroding, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. The test was complete. The results were in. And now it was time for the reckoning. The moment of truth, so long awaited, was finally at hand. The air in the Thorne Legacy Building's grand ballroom crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Silas Blackwood, having just concluded his self-congratulatory speech, stood beaming, awaiting the inevitable cascade of applause and well wishes, basking in the imagined glory of his new position. Vivian Sterling, poised and elegant, held a glass of champagne, her eyes fixed on the doors, anticipating the arrival of the board members who would officially usher in the new era. Her vision of power almost within her grasp. The homeless man who had momentarily disrupted the proceedings was now standing near the entrance, his back to the room, seemingly ignored, as if the brief shock had worn off, and he was once again merely an unsightly fixture, a forgotten anomaly. Suddenly, a new presence made itself known. The heavy oak doors, which had moments ago allowed the tattered figure to enter, now swung open with a theatrical flourish, revealing two formidable men in perfectly tailored suits. One was Mr. Henderson, Lysander Thorne's longtime, utterly discreet attorney, a man whose reputation for integrity was as unblemished as his silver hair, his face a picture of grave purpose. The other was a younger, powerfully built man, clearly a bodyguard, whose stern gaze swept over the room, assessing every corner, every face with trained precision. His presence alone exuded an undeniable authority. All eyes, drawn by the sudden dramatic entrance, turned to the doorway. Silas's smile faltered, replaced by a frown of annoyance. His moment of triumph interrupted yet again. "Mr. Henderson? What is the meaning of this? You're late for the will reading. And who is this riffraff you've brought with you?" His voice was sharp, laced with impatience, demanding an explanation for the intrusion. Mr. Henderson, his face a mask of solemn gravity, ignored Silas completely, his gaze fixed on the figure by the door. He walked purposefully towards the homeless man, his steps measured and deliberate. As he approached, the old man slowly turned, his eyes, no longer veiled by feigned confusion or weariness, now burning with an intense, unmistakable clarity, a fierce intelligence that bespoke a lifetime of strategic thinking. He completed the action he had begun moments earlier, pulling away the last remnants of the prosthetic beard and wig with a deliberate, almost agonizing slowness, each movement a hammer blow to the collective consciousness of the room. Beneath the grime and dishevelment, the sharp, intelligent features of Lysander Thorne, though aged and weary from his ordeal, began to emerge. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into an absolute, deathly silence, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Gasps, sharp and incredulous, pierced the stillness as the impossible, the unthinkable unfolded before their very eyes. Faces twisted in disbelief, eyes widened in terror. Silas's jaw dropped, his face draining of all color, turning a ghastly white. He staggered backward, knocking over a champagne flute, the sound echoing loudly in the sudden void, shattering the silence with a sharp crack. "No, no, it can't be," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible. You're dead. We had a funeral. The doctors, the certificates." His mind raced, desperately trying to reconcile the impossible reality with the carefully constructed lie he had believed. Vivian Sterling, who had previously maintained her icy composure with an almost supernatural discipline, now stared, her eyes wide with a terror that ripped through her carefully constructed facade, revealing the raw, naked fear beneath. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor with a dull thud, unnoticed in the overwhelming shock. Her meticulously applied makeup seemed to crack, revealing a raw, naked fear, a fundamental vulnerability she had always sought to hide. Lysander Thorne, no longer the shuffling vagrant, stood tall, his shoulders back, his posture radiating an unshakable authority that had built an empire. He was still clad in the tattered clothes, a deliberate choice, a powerful visual indictment of their callousness. His voice, once raspy and broken, now resonated with the commanding authority that had built an empire, filled with an ironic amusement that sent shivers down spines. Dead. Lysander's voice boomed, clear and strong, cutting through the stunned silence. Oh, I was very much alive, Silas. Merely observing the vulture's circle, waiting for the carcass. Observing the true measure of your character, when you believed the hand that fed you was no longer capable of holding a pen. His gaze was unwavering, piercing. He fixed his gaze on Silas, who flinched. You spoke of my legacy, Silas. You crowed about how you would usher in a new era, untainted by slovenliness. You, who ordered your security to harass an old man, to remove the blight from your property. You who spoke of my work with such grandiosity, yet treated the very ground I stood upon, and the man who owned it with utter contempt. Lysander's voice hardened, becoming a whip-crack of accusation, each word a painful blow. You gloated over my demise, eager to claim what you never earned, never deserved. You saw my death as your liberation, your golden ticket to a life of unearned privilege. Then his eyes shifted to Vivian, piercing her with a gaze that stripped away her pretense, exposing her bare soul. And you, Vivian? So concerned with aesthetics, with undesirable elements. You, who walked past me, dropped a dollar bill as if I were a stray dog and complained about the value of the property, all while ignoring the value of a human soul. You, who would rather see me starve on the streets than acknowledge my existence because my presence sullied your pristine corporate image. Your meticulousness extended only to superficialities, never to compassion. His voice, though calm, was devastating in its precision, each word a precisely aimed arrow. He gestured to Mr. Henderson, who stepped forward with a sleek, black briefcase, placing it reverently on a nearby table. The death certificate, the body, the funeral, all a carefully orchestrated illusion, a test of loyalty, of character, of humanity. And I must say, Silas, Vivian, you both failed spectacularly. You revealed yourselves to be exactly what I feared you were, devoid of empathy, consumed by greed. Silas, finding his voice amidst his sputtering rage, sputtered, "This is insane. You can't do this. The will, it's legal." He desperately clawed at the air, seeking some legal loophole, some shred of defense. Lysander merely smiled. A chilling, triumphant smile that held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of justice. Oh, the will is very legal, Silas. And it is about to be read in its true form. He stepped towards the podium, his tattered clothes a stark contrast to the luxurious setting, a visual representation of his journey. Mr. Henderson placed a new, sealed document on the lectern, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the crumpled, fake will Silas had held moments ago. You see, I have always believed that character is revealed not in the light of prosperity, but in the darkness of adversity. And your characters, my dear nephew and esteemed executive, have been illuminated with a clarity that is utterly blinding, a truth so stark it cannot be denied. He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. The room was silent, save for the ragged breathing of Silas and Vivian, who stood frozen in their despair. The game is indeed over, Lysander declared, his voice echoing through the stunned ballroom. The final pronouncement of his victory. But not in the way you imagined. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and profoundly satisfying for Lysander Thorne, yet utterly devastating for those who had reveled in his supposed demise. Mr. Henderson, his face impassive, his voice clear and resonant, proceeded to read the true will of Lysander Thorne. The document, sealed and notarized months before Lysander's death, revoked all previous wills and codicils, effectively disinheriting Silas Blackwood and specifying explicit clauses regarding Vivian Sterling's employment and any benefits. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, leaving no room for doubt or appeal. Silas Blackwood, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, rage, and despair, listened as the words stripped him bare, robbing him of every illusion of power. The Thorne Empire, the vast fortune he had coveted and celebrated as his own, was now irrevocably beyond his grasp. Not only was he disinherited, but the will also contained a clause stipulating that any assets or funds he had accessed or attempted to liquidate during Lysander's absence were to be immediately returned with severe penalties for noncompliance, including potential criminal charges. His lavish spending, his arrogant pronouncements, his plans for expansion all evaporated into thin air, leaving him with nothing but debt and a shattered reputation. "This is a mockery. A farce!" Silas shrieked, his voice cracking with humiliation, a desperate, animalistic sound. He lunged forward as if to snatch the document from Mr. Henderson's hands, but the formidable bodyguard stepped in front of him, blocking his path with an immovable presence, a silent barrier of power. "You can't do this. I'm your nephew. Your only family. I dedicated my life to this. To you." His pleas, however, fell on deaf ears, ringing hollowly in the stunned silence. Lysander watched him, his expression cold, devoid of any pity. Silas had dedicated his life not to Lysander, but to Lysander's money, and the truth was now laid bare for all to see. The public humiliation was immediate and crushing. News of Lysander Thorne's miraculous resurrection and the true nature of his test spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles and beyond, amplified by every news outlet. Silas, once lauded as the ambitious heir, became a laughingstock, his name synonymous with greed and deceit. His professional reputation was in tatters, his social standing utterly ruined. Potential business partners recoiled, wary of a man who had shown such callous disregard for his own uncle. He lost everything, his inheritance, his position, his credibility. Stripped of his wealth and power, Silas was exposed for what he truly was, a hollow, entitled man, incapable of genuine empathy or honest endeavor. He was forced to sell his expensive cars, his luxurious apartment, and faced potential legal action for breach of trust regarding company funds he had misused during his brief, illusory reign. His downfall was complete, a stark, public testament to the consequences of unbridled avarice, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Vivian Sterling fared no better. The will specifically stipulated her immediate termination from all positions within the Thorne organization, effective immediately with no severance package beyond her accrued vacation time. Her carefully cultivated career, her hard-earned prestige, crumbled in an instant. Her network of influential contacts, built on her association with the Thorne Empire, vanished overnight, their loyalty as fleeting as her own. No one wanted to be associated with someone who had displayed such contempt for the true patriarch of such a powerful entity. Her elitism, once a tool of her advancement, now became her undoing, isolating her completely. She was ostracized, her name becoming a cautionary tale in corporate circles, a reminder that character ultimately trumped cunning. The icy mask she had worn for years shattered, revealing a woman devoid of compassion whose only value lay in her proximity to power. She would struggle to find employment in her field, her reputation irrevocably stained, her future bleak. As Silas and Vivian were escorted, humiliated, from the ballroom, their faces etched with despair, Lysander's gaze shifted, seeking out another figure. Elara, the cleaner, stood near the back, her eyes wide with bewilderment and a silent, profound understanding. She had witnessed the entire spectacle, the transformation of the homeless man into the formidable Lysander Thorne. She clutched her cleaning cart, her face pale, unable to process the magnitude of what she had seen, a quiet witness to a world she barely understood. Lysander beckoned her forward, a gentle gesture that commanded attention without demanding it. "Elara," he said, his voice softer now, yet still resonating with authority, "come forward, please." Hesitantly, Elara pushed her cart towards him, her movements uncertain as if she were walking into a dream. She was trembling slightly, her gaze fixed on the man who, just hours ago, she had offered a stale sandwich, now revealed as the legendary magnate. Lysander offered her a genuine, gentle smile, a warmth radiating from his eyes that had been absent for decades, a warmth he hadn't realized he was capable of expressing. Elara, he began, his voice thick with a genuine emotion, for months you showed me kindness when no one else did. You offered warmth, dignity, and compassion to a man you believed had nothing. You did so without expectation, despite your own struggles, simply because it was the right thing to do. You saw a human being when others saw only an inconvenience. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. That, Elara, is the true measure of character. That is the kind of legacy I wish to build, to foster, a legacy not of bricks and mortar, but of genuine human connection. He then made an announcement that sent another wave of shock through the few remaining, stunned attendees who had chosen to stay and observe the unfolding drama. Therefore, Elara, I am establishing a new foundation in my name, the Thorn Compassion Initiative. And I want you, Elara, to be its director. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Tears of utter disbelief and overwhelming gratitude streamed freely down her face. Mr. Thorn. I'm just a cleaner. I don't know anything about foundations, she choked out, overwhelmed. Lysander chuckled softly, a genuine, mirthful sound. You know more than anyone here, Elara. You know compassion. You know kindness. You know humility. These are the qualities this foundation will embody. He turned to Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson will provide you with all the legal and financial support you need. Furthermore, he continued, his voice ringing out, ensuring everyone present heard, the foundation will provide you with a fully furnished home, mortgage-free, a beautiful and comfortable residence, and a substantial fund to ensure your mother's every medical need is met and your family's future is secure for generations. This is not charity, Elara. This is a reward for a pure heart, a recognition of your inherent goodness. Elara broke down completely, tears streaming freely down her face, her body shaking with emotion. She tried to speak, but only choked sobs emerged. She had never dreamed of such a future, such generosity. A home, financial security, the best care for her ailing mother, all of it, a miracle born from a simple act of kindness, a testament to the unseen virtues. She had given a sandwich, a blanket, a moment of human connection, and in return, received a future beyond her wildest dreams. It was the purest form of justice, a testament to the quiet power of genuine goodness. Months passed, softening the sharp edges of the dramatic reveal, yet cementing its profound impact on all involved. Lysander Thorn, no longer the reclusive magnate, nor the discarded vagrant, embraced a new chapter of his life. He remained keenly involved in his empire, but with a renewed focus on ethical practices and community development, guiding it towards a more humane path. He delegated more, trusting Mr. Henderson implicitly with the day-to-day operations, and found a profound peace in stepping back from the relentless, soul-crushing pursuit of profit for its own sake. He spent his days overseeing the Thorn Compassion Initiative, transforming it into a powerful force for good, funding shelters, community programs, educational scholarships, and medical aid for the underprivileged. The transactional relationships that had once defined his existence slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet satisfaction derived from making a tangible, positive difference in the lives of real people. He had finally found a purpose greater than accumulation. He often visited the Thorn Compassion Initiative's main office, which was now housed in a beautifully renovated building, also a Thorn property, filled with light and warmth. There, he would see Elara, no longer the weary cleaner, but a confident, compassionate director. She had blossomed in her new role, her innate kindness proving to be a formidable asset in leading the foundation. She managed its projects with a quiet efficiency, her empathy guiding every decision, her decisions rooted in a deep understanding of human need. Her mother, now living comfortably in their new, beautiful home, received the best medical care, her health steadily improving, and Elara's face, though still bearing the faint lines of past struggles, now glowed with a serenity she had never known. She remained humble, never forgetting her origins, and often shared her own story of hardship, inspiring countless others with her resilience and unwavering spirit. Silas Blackwood, once poised to inherit a vast fortune, found himself facing the harsh realities of a life without unearned privilege. His reputation was irrevocably shattered, his name a byword for greed and betrayal, whispered with contempt. He struggled to find stable employment, his arrogance and lack of integrity preceding him, every door closing in his face. The luxurious life he had so eagerly anticipated was a distant memory, replaced by the indignity of scrambling for meager opportunities, living a life he had once scorned. He was forced to confront the emptiness of a life built solely on superficiality and entitlement, learning, in the cruelest way, the true value of character. Vivian Sterling, too, experienced a precipitous fall from grace. Her polished facade crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and professional ostracism. Her corporate elitism, once admired in certain circles, now served only to isolate her, turning former colleagues into cold strangers. She found herself unable to secure any position of significance, her career effectively over, her once stellar resume now a liability. The properties she once managed with such disdain now seemed to mock her from afar, glittering symbols of a world she had forever lost access to, a world from which she was now irrevocably exiled. She became a cautionary tale, a stark example of how character, or the lack thereof, ultimately determines one's fate, regardless of ambition or intellect. Lysander Thorne, observing these outcomes, felt not triumph, but a quiet vindication. He had found his true legacy, not in the towering buildings he had erected, but in the lives he touched, in the character he exposed, and in the kindness he uplifted. He had learned that wealth, in its raw form, was merely a tool. Its true power lay not in accumulation, but in its judicious distribution, in its ability to empower the deserving and to correct the scales of injustice, to right the wrongs of a world too often driven by greed. The story of Lysander Thorne, the secret millionaire who became a homeless man, echoed through the city and beyond, a modern parable in an age obsessed with material gain. It served as a potent, enduring reminder that a person's true worth is never measured by the size of their bank account or the grandeur of their titles, but by the content of their heart, by their capacity for empathy and kindness. It taught that true character shines brightest not when the spotlights are on, but when all external trappings are stripped away, in the quiet, unassuming moments of genuine human connection. And perhaps, most profoundly, it reaffirmed a timeless truth, that kindness, however small, however unnoticed, always finds its way back, bringing with it a reward far richer and more enduring than any earthly fortune. For it is in the darkness that character truly reveals itself, and it is through selfless acts that the greatest legacies are forged. If this story of betrayal, revelation, and redemption resonated with you, imagine the countless other tales waiting to be discovered on our channel. We delve deep into the human spirit, uncovering truths that will shock, inspire, and make you question everything you thought you knew. Don't miss out on more incredible stories like Lysander's. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new narrative unfolds. And now we want to hear from you. What was the most shocking moment in Lysander's test? Do you believe Silas and Vivian truly deserved their fate? And what did Alara's kindness teach you about humanity? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Your perspective is invaluable to us,